House rent law and rental agreement in Nepal. If an individual who owns or possesses a house transfers the right to use the house for a specific period, then it is deemed that the house has been rented. In this context, house refers to the whole house, a room or unit of the house, the story of the house, or the land of the house. Term of house rent agreement in Nepal. The term for rental agreement in Nepal for rental purposes mentioned above shall be according to agreement without exceeding 5 years. If the house is rented for business purposes, the term of rental agreement will be as prescribed on the said agreement. However, the term of agreement can be added after the expiry of the agreement upon mutual consent of the parties. Matters to be included in rental agreement: full name and address of the owner and tenant, their citizenship number and passport or identification certificate in the case of a foreigner, place and plot number of the land where the house is located, purpose for rent, date of commission of rent, validity period of rent, monthly rent, time and mode of payment of rent, liability to pay tariffs of electricity, water supply, telephone used in the house. Matter on payment of house rent tax. If the rented house is to be insured, then matter relating to it. Matter on leaving the rented house and eviction of the tenant from it. Matter as to whether the rented house can be sublet to other or not, and other necessary matters. However, it is not necessary to enter into an agreement in writing with the tenant if the monthly house rent does not exceed 20,000 rupees. While the rental agreement is prepared, 2 witnesses must also sign the agreement, and each agreement thereof shall be retained each by the owner and the tenant. Obligation of house owner: to allow the tenant to use the house in accordance with the agreement, to arrange for such water and electricity supply, sewerage and sanitation in the rented house as may be required, except as otherwise provided for in the agreement, to prevent the tenant from insecurity, harassment or unrest from other persons dwelling in the house, to abide by the other matters outlined in the agreement. Obligation of tenant: to pay the rent to the house owner within the specified period, to maintain sanitation in, take care of, protect and safeguard the rented house appropriately and reasonably as if it were their own, not to do any act such as causing unrest, harassment or insecurity to the other dwellers in the house or neighbors, to abide by the other matters outlined in the agreement. Payment of house rent. Rent in Nepal can be paid by check or cash or any other mode or procedure of payment as laid out in the rental agreement. If the agreement does not provide for any mode and procedure of the rent payment, then the tenant must pay the rent to the house owner within 7 days of the expiration of each month. If the owner received the rent by way of cash, he or she shall give a receipt to the tenant. Obligation to pay tax and other charge. Except as otherwise set forth in the agreement, it shall be the obligation of the house owner to pay the tax and other charges leviable by the law in relation to the rented house. Repair and maintenance of rented house. The tenant must conduct the repair and maintenance of their rental property. Termination of agreement and leaving rented house by tenant. A tenant has the right to leave the rented house before the expiration of the rental period in following circumstances: if the house owner fails to perform their obligation, if the tenant no longer needs the house for the purpose for which they rented it, if the house owner does any act contravening the agreement or prevailing Nepalese law. However, the tenant must give the house owner advanced written notice of at least 35 days before leaving the building. Termination of agreement and eviction of tenant by house owner. In the following circumstances, the house owner can remove the tenant from the house: if the tenant fails to perform their obligations, if the tenant commits in the rented house any offense-related activity prohibited by law, if the house owner needs the house for themselves, if it is necessary to repair and maintain the house by removing inhabitants from the house, If the rented house does not appear to be appropriate for human habitation from technical and health perspectives, if the period of house rent expires, if the tenant does any act in contravention of the agreement or prevailing Nepalese law. The house or land owner must give written notice to the tenant in advance of at least 35 days to evict the tenant. The power to vacate the house by house owner and local level ward office. If a tenant disappears without paying rent for 3 months or more without notice, and even if the tenant, successor or agent cannot be found, then the house owner shall submit an application with such statement to the concerned ward office. The concerned ward office shall make a public notice inviting the tenant to appear within a period of 15 days. If the tenant doesn't appear within the designated period after issuance of official notice, then the concerned ward office may open and vacate the rented house.